So, we at MindMineTV are really into education, whether it's self-education, right? You're educating yourself on something, you're watching a tutorial, you're going online, you're asking questions, you're trying it out by yourself, trying to figure it out, or you get some formal education. You go to school, you take some courses online, you ask a mentor to help out, you attend a community education class, that sort of thing. Because educating oneself is important in allowing you to make the decisions that you want to make, right? The more
it's an
information
ongoing
you have,
process.
Yeah, it's definitely an ongoing process. Lifelong learning.
Exactly.
As it were. And of course, when one is younger, potentially in school, in this formal schooling, you may maybe not necessarily have that same outlook, right? And I know when snow days came around, I was super excited for them. But around other parts of the world, some children are actually not only looking forward to school and to get their education, but they're actually willing to endure a lot for the ability to go to school. Mm-hmm. And it kind of brings up a lot of different questions, of course. One of which is, how much would you endure to get your education, right? If it wasn't necessarily something that was easy, or something that maybe you kind of took a little bit for granted. Now, there's a 10-year-old boy in China's Yunnan province, who regularly treks through 3 miles to get to school through terrible weather, -9 degrees Celsius weather. That's 15 degrees Fahrenheit. It's pretty chilly. 3 miles. That's intense. And as you can see below, there's a photo of him. If you're watching the video, if you're listening on Podbean, go check out the video. He's got icicles forming on his hair, and his cheeks are super red. And you can look at this photo and say, wow, that's pretty funny, that's hilarious. But the reality of it is that in rural China, there are some obstacles that kids have to face to be able to even get an education. In this particular school, they actually don't even have enough funding to have heat in the wintertime. And so, this kid's going to school in cold weather, obviously doesn't really have a lot of weather resistant outfits.
Yeah, I mean, he has a jacket on, but he has no hat, no scarves,
no gloves.
No gloves, just the jacket itself.
And then you get to school and it's still cold there because they can't heat the building. And he's there because he's like, I had to make it for exams. That's dedication, right? This particular photo was actually taken by the headmaster of that primary school in Xinji Township. And again, that's in southwestern China, southwestern China's Yunnan province. And when I first saw this photo, I kind of wanted to find out more about it. And he's actually one of the children that's called the left behind children in China. And these kids, they don't live with their parents. Their parents are typically off in the bigger cities trying to get better wages so that they can support their family. And so these kids live with other siblings, other family relatives, typically with their grandparents. And, their every day is sort of a challenge for them, just for that alone. And now for this kid to then be like, yeah, but you know what? I want to go get my education. I want to go to school. I want to try to, I guess, make a better life for myself.
Right.
That's intense. And, and there's plenty of these examples all over the world where children have had to face all sorts of obstacles to try to get an education. Whether it is climate related, whether it's economic hardships. There's definitely examples of, in war-torn countries where kids are still going to school, still trying to better themselves in that way, where they're not just, I guess, in a way stuck where they're at the place that they're living in the economic status that they're living in. They're trying to educate themselves. They're trying to make something a little bit better for themselves, and that's commendable.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like with this situation, it's really tough because these kids want an education and they're going so far the way, but they're also these kids known as the left behind kids. Now, how would you like that as a title for one? It's be like, oh, you're one of the leftover kids, basically. You're one of the left behind kids. And, to have to grow up already trying to get an education while live out in the rural area of China, going through these extremes of weather conditions and overall like farming conditions, right? I mean, you have real early mornings trying to help your family on the farm. You go to school, you come back, you work more on the farm, do your homework if you have time, and then do that all over again. And in China, they don't have like what we have in the US, which is that 5-day school week. They don't have that 5-day school week like we do. They have more. And they actually have less days off than we do. So this kid is going through all different weather conditions just to try to get to school. And the fact that he doesn't have his parents there to support him emotionally or physically there, maybe financially, but that's it. And to not really have that connection with your direct parents, I mean, that just seems mind-blowing. And I definitely commend these children for going through this and still pushing through, like this child here who has been left unnamed, to go for the education knowing, hey, I have an exam today, and I think too, in a way, it's like, well, this is probably his only real interaction with his friends because he lives so far away from the school, and I'm sure they do too, from one another. And so for them, it's not an easy trek either. And so this is really his time to connect with his friends and to be there to learn something. And, I think there is a lot of pressure, of course, as we know, on the children in China to be top notch, to be the best, both from their government and from their families. And so they're willing to go through extremes to try to get that, even when it's not readily available. But on the other hand, though, I do want to point out that as easy it is to raise up the heroes or the people who really do great, commendable things, it's so important to look on the other side and look at what's creating those obstacles in the first place, though, and chastise that or go after that and say, this needs to be improved. So, for instance, and I mentioned this to you earlier when we were talking about this story, was the fact that I think this came out about a year ago now, where a kid, if you will, at the time, he's probably about like between 17 to 19 years old, and he worked at Chick-fil-A, and he got in a terrible car accident and still had to go into work the next day with a neck brace, with an arm in a sling. I think the leg was in a cast as well. I mean, this was a terrible, nasty car crash, and he was lucky that he was able to not have to be put into the hospital for a long period of time. He was able to leave that day, but he was all bandaged up, had the braces and everything else, had to go to work the next day. And the reason why, though, is one being because Chick-fil-A, which was the company he was working for, wouldn't give him the time off. They also did not have paid leave, at least not worth it enough for him to take off, because he also helped his family financially, and they would not be able to afford to pay bills and get groceries and things if he did not go to work. And so there you could say, and many people did, hey, this kid is amazing. He's, this millennial, because there's a stigma evidently that millennials don't work and don't do anything, which is not true. But, they're saying, oh, this millennial who went out in the world and he's working even after this terrible thing happened. He's moving forward. He's doing things. And yet no one really looked at the fact that, well, Chick-fil-A isn't doing something right here. Why is it that someone who is in such terrible condition not be able to get time off to heal, not be able to get the money that they need financially from their work, their very tough work, by the way, being on their feet for 8 to 16 hours a day, in order to help pay for their family? And that they actually have to go through this process of, well, I either work, even if I'm in pain, or I lose my job and I can't, afford anything. And I think that's really something we need to point out here too, is that with this situation, even though now we've looked at articles as of toward the end of 2017, China has finally said, we are doing something. We are, creating programs, and we're going to be implementing them shortly to help tens of millions of children like this student here from experiencing this, and from really giving them the proper education, the proper tools to progress in their lives. But where is it right now? You know what I mean? And like, why wasn't it put in sooner? Because there are articles out about these left behind children who have been left behind since 2014, 2013, I think was the furthest back article that I saw on this situation, and nothing was being done.
What baffles me is it's the children of today that are going to grow up and take care of the rest of us later, right? So if we're like fucking them up now and not giving them the proper resources, we're not helping them grow, we're not helping them achieve all the things that they will need to achieve in order to then continue to run the country, right? Or to contribute to it, or to, do all this other stuff. Like, we're just hurting ourselves in the process. Like, so I just don't understand. I feel like, overall, mobs of people, governments of countries, I feel like they don't really sit and think about that as like, if we fuck up a 10-year-old today, that means there's gonna be a wave of 10-year-olds, 30 years from now, who are gonna like not take care of me. We're not gonna have running water, for fuck's sake, or something. Are they just thinking that robots are gonna take up all that work? Like, I just don't get it, right? Like, why? And this is true, I feel like, in almost every country where whether it's teachers or the education system overall are not given the resources to help these kids grow properly, right? Like, you're not able to give them the guidance that they need, so like, you're only hurting yourself down the line, right? I mean, am I just the only person who thinks that?
Right. Well, you would think that, right? That people would be undertrained and incapable of doing many of the traits that specific jobs may require down the line, or that you would need to utilize in your everyday life. Even if it's just taking care of yourself, being able to cook, being able to understand about money and paying your bills, understanding at least a little bit about your government and what it does and how it impacts you. And yet it just seems like they just kind of get thrown to the side, or they wait until the problem is so massive that they just can't ignore it anymore. And they have even potentially other countries knocking at their door going, hey, what you're doing is not right. Or, just the fact that you're ignoring it or putting a blind eye to it is not the right way of going about this situation. And I understand, at least because we've talked about China specifically, about that big city disease, the sense of that, Shanghai is getting so big, Beijing is getting so big, and they just don't know where to put everyone, or how to be able to fund and help everyone within the city properly, and that they really need to spread out, figure out either creating new central hubs or growing out the cities further. And so I completely get that and respect that there's a lot going on right now, and it can be easy, unfortunately, to put a blind eye more toward the rural areas, especially if the assumption's already built in. These people will probably end up in the city, right? I mean, that's probably the thing most people are going for, because we're seeing it in every country. We also mentioned about Russia as well several episodes back, where people were leaving rural areas to go into the cities again, like Moscow or Kyiv or something like that. Like, again, the rural areas are just becoming dilapidated shanty towns is really what they're becoming. So, why should we invest in that? But I think, again, this is short term. They're looking at the now and not looking at long term, where what if we did build up these rural areas and give them the tools that they need, give them the training, give them the resources so they can still do work without having to go into the city.
Right. And the whole point of progress and innovation and moving forward is that then you can have more efficient processes and more efficient systems in place and more resources that can help everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, that's the whole point, right? And I feel like a lot of, people who are in power, in whatever way that manifests itself in a particular country, don't give a shit about anybody else but themselves, which again, it's like, okay, well, fiefdoms were back in the Middle Ages, and maybe we don't go back there, but I feel like there's still this mentality of, well, the elite is up here and they've got all the stuff, and then some stuff trickles down to the literal peasants that they, you know, have or something. It's very sad, because I feel like the more we, you know, as a global civilization progress and innovate, I feel like in some ways, well, now it's just much more easier to exploit all the like the bad side of human nature, if you will. You know, it's like, all right, well, let's get more of the more other good parts out as well. And that's why, to me, stories like these, like this little boy, they're so inspiring, because, you know, all of in the article, it talks about how his classmates sort of, you know, they say that he's sort of the class clown, and that he does things, you know, to kind of get a good laugh. But at the same time, the fact that, you know, he's still showing up to school, I mean, that's a heck of a long way to walk in cold weather just for a laugh, you know? So he's obviously also trying to make a better life for himself. And that's amazing, because he's 10, y'all.
Yeah, he's 10, and he has that kind of built into him, which shows that even though the core family may not be there, you know, the grandparents and the siblings and stuff are doing something, I think, well, in the sense of saying, hey, education is important. What you learn gives you more power to do other things and greater things and have a larger impact on your surroundings. And again, this is just personal bias on education, but I think there is a lot to it, and that, you know, we're always learning no matter what it is. And I don't say education in the sense of like, well, you have to take your traditional algebra class, your traditional this class or that class, but that you should always be learning and be willing to learn. You know, and the fact that we can never say that, oh, well, we never learn anything. Really? Like, you know, you're always constantly learning and picking up new things. Even if, because we're on Twitch, I'll say this, you pick up a new video game and you learn the mechanics of it and you learn the story of it. Like, you're still learning something, right? So we're always constantly learning no matter what it is. And I'm not going to tell you, you know, what it is to learn or what it means to have an actual education. What it is what it is for you, right? It's what you want out of it. And this student here has chosen this school and this specific path that the school is giving to him as his education, and I can appreciate him going all out for it, and I really think it's commendable. And I know a lot of people will probably look at this and then project it onto the US and say, well, how does this match up in comparison to other students in the US? And, you know, I'm sure it's going to be split. There are going to be people saying, hey, you know, people work hard in the US as well, and people want their education, they're going to get it. Unfortunately, some people don't have those opportunities given to them either, in the US even. Depending on where you live. Again, we can't think all in just East Coast, West Coast either. We have to think about the rural areas of the middle of the country. And so there are those factors there. There are also some people, I'm sure, that look at it and go, oh, American people, you know, and American children, they don't want to learn. They never want to go to school.
They're so lazy.
They're so lazy. But in the same respect, I feel like a lot of that has been marketed to them. So that's all they know.
Right. Like it's cool to not want to be in school.
Oh yeah, or that it's a waste of time, and that they don't see it as a benefit, because I feel like personally our educational system doesn't do enough to explain why we're learning what we're learning. What is the long-term, talking again about looking at short-term and long-term, what is that long-term impact of education on my life? And I think if you properly explain that and get it through to people, it sticks, and they go, all right, this is what I want to do, or I want to continue my education, but maybe this isn't the path for me. But then give them the opportunity to figure out what path it is that they need to take to learn, because we all learn in different ways as well. And so I think it's really important for us in the US to push that, because otherwise we're just selling the fact of, well, you have to take a math class, and you have to take a science class, and you have to take an English class, and if you're lucky enough, maybe you can get a second language to fit in there. And the arts, what's that? Maybe for after school. We'll save the arts for after school. We'll give you some popsicle sticks and some Elmer's glue, and you can have at it. Sorry, that was pure art sarcasm on that one, if you couldn't tell. But I think you can get my point here, of that. I think it just the benefits need to be given, just like with anything else. when you're talking to someone, let's say you're trying to sell me something, let's say education, maybe a specific college, that I may want to go to or I'm interested in. You're going to sell me on points that I know impact my life, right? Well, we can't just automatically assume that, well, education overall, everyone knows is going to impact their life. Really, we're talking about kids here who don't even know what they want to do with their lives yet. And we would, at 10 years old, I would never go up to a kid and say, so, serious talk, one-on-one here. What's your career going to be for the rest of your life? No.
Choose it now, forever hold your peace.
They don't know. They don't have enough experience yet in life. They don't have that understanding. Let them be a freaking 10-year-old kid, for God's sake. So, I think there's that disconnect as well. And I want to say that too, because I feel like some people would go, oh yeah, American kids are lazy. I don't think that's really the situation. It's just kind of what's handed to them and what's sold to them.
Well, I would say too, to an earlier point that you made, the types of things that we're taught in school don't necessarily coincide with what we should be taught in school. Or what you're going to need later in life, I wish I had financial courses, and not, here's how to freaking invest or something, but just, here's what you should be thinking about when you get out of school. If you get a job, you'll have income. Out of that income come out taxes. If you get this and that, then you have this. If you run up, just here's some basic intro information about life, y'all. And I feel like, to me, that's what an education, at least a formal educational system, should provide. And obviously, it's important to know how to read and write and do math. Yes. But it's also important to know how to live in that culture that you're going to be part of. And I have not yet heard of an example anywhere in the world, and if you have examples, please do feel free to share them, of a school system that actually teaches you, hey, here's some tips and tricks on how to become a successful human. Take them or leave them, but here's what we've learned. And I feel like there's so much more focus on sort of like these academic type of subjects, which, I don't know, when you are 10, for example, who the fuck cares? And maybe when you're younger, you don't really understand the importance of some of these other things, but that's the whole purpose of having somebody who is older, who is, quote, wiser, to be, they need to impart that information onto you, right? I don't think, back when we were all living in tribes somewhere in a stereotypical cave, people were like, here's how you fucking hunt so you don't die later, because you can get your own food, right? And, as somebody who went to a European school system, went to an American school system, and then also went to university, I don't feel like I learned really some basic skill sets that I thought I should have learned, that I wish I had learned when I was younger, that now looking back at it, I'm like, nobody taught me how to, be a decent human being, for fuck's sake. Sure, I know all about finding the square root of, imaginary numbers. Whoop-de-fucking-do. But, I couldn't, I had to fight to actually get into home ec class because it was conflicting with one of my other courses, because I was like, I want to learn how to make food. And, I know maybe there's some people out there who, say, well, some things have to be left to the guardians of the children, maybe, the parents, the grandparents, whoever might, is taking care of them. But the reality of that too is, and especially in these cases with the left behind children, those people may not be available to do that. Or maybe they don't have it together either, or maybe they don't know how to teach, or maybe, there's like a whole lot of other things, right? But if you're counting especially on a formal education system, I don't know. I feel like overall, it just kind of lets down kids, And that's my 2 cents. Or maybe it's three. It's probably 3.5 cents by now, ever since that phrase got started, because inflation.
There you go.
That's US dollar cents, USD currency. Just doing that.
Yeah, well, and hopefully what we can see is overall in education is more support from it. I mean, every single year, at least in the U.S., we hear about cuts to education, cuts to Really just anything that makes us human. I mean, cuts on anything that supports cultures and the arts. Those keep getting stripped away. And I think, again, that's how we learn, though. That's how we pass down information. You were mentioning like caveman times here, like Paleolithic era and stuff like that. Well, a lot of times what was passed on was stories based on what was on cave walls. So all of a sudden when it went to spoken word, you look at Homer's Iliad, for instance, and all that, and the Oedipus cycles and all that. Like much of that was told verbally and then passed down. And every single one of those stories had morals to it, had something that you can learn, some kind of philosophy that you could pull from to go, this is kind of how I want to live my life. Or this is how I don't want to live my life, depending on the character and the storyline, right? And so, I feel like we're pulling more and more of that away, and what we're giving instead are things that then could have the potential of pulling out a dollar value from. Like, for instance, whenever computers started really picking up in the late 90s or whatever again, that huge, and then we had the boom, everything we learned during that time in school, before university, was like computer science stuff. Okay, you need to learn how to type, you need to learn about the computers, you need to learn all this stuff. And it wasn't like, well, you need to learn it because you're going to be using it a lot, even though that is another thing, right? But the biggest factor was, well, you could do this for a job, and it's one of the biggest jobs, and you can make money from it. And that's what you kind of keep hearing or just kind of assume based off of how people talked about it. And there was no real intrinsic value, like, well, this is going to make you a better person by understanding how a motherboard works, or what RAM does in a computer. I mean, none of that was explained. It was just like, well, you make money.
First day of school. Hey, what are we going to learn today? You need to make money. Okay, class dismissed.
And you need to work for a company. It was never, create your own company or be an entrepreneur. It was to work for someone else. And actually, Tyson brings up something kind of similar in our chat here, where he mentions too that, especially in China, though all over the world, 1800s, early 1900s, you had kids still working in factories. Mm-hmm. And so they would basically be raised in a factory or in a work environment working for a company, and that's all they knew. They had the business or the company really think for them and tell them how to live their life. This is what they had to do, because it brought the biggest outcome financially to that corporation.
Right. Man, corporations. The root of all evil. No, I'm just kidding.
Again, it depends on who wields it, right? Like anything else. I think corporations, because they're not their own entity. They're not a separate individual breathing entity, but it's all about how you steer it. A car can be dangerous too. We have more car crashes than many other things, like planes falling out of the sky. And yet people aren't condemning the car, right? They're not saying, I have a fear of going into cars, typically.
No, because companies need you to get in the car and get to work, and then shops need you to get in the car and get there and buy the stuff.
Right. But
I'm being sarcastic.
But the actual point of it is the fact that, well, now I lost the point because.
No, right, but we're not condemning cars themselves. It's the person behind the wheel.
The wheel, exactly, how they utilize that tool. And the business is the same way. The business provides a service. That business is thus a tool, and how you use it, how you wield it, will be impacting everyone.
Right.